how I would define ownership is that understanding that success is not a surprise. Like once you internalize that concept that success is not a surprise and that like it's an outcome or it is a almost inevitable outcome. When you realize that success is not a surprise, you will take like that is ownership. You take ownership because you're like, oh, I control this. Like I own this.
This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm Justin.
And I'm Elise. Welcome to the show.
So today's guest is somebody that you don't want to miss. And as you guys are driving, working out, laying down, meditating, looking at the sky, wherever you're taking this podcast in, be sure to screenshot this and share it because it is something that is going to pour into everyone who listens. And anytime that you get around somebody who has been able to create financial freedom for themselves from scratch and be able to do this in a way that is available to anybody, whether you have $5 in the bank or $500 in the bank or $5 million in the bank, this is available to you. And the mentality that this man operates with, the value system that he lives with, and the fruit in which he is experiencing on a day-to-day basis is inspiring and quite frankly can change your life. And so I really encourage you to lean in, screenshot this, share it, let people know about it, because it will not only change your life, it will also change theirs. So Brandon Turner, it is a pleasure to have you on today. And thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom, your story, and your testimony with our Own It audience.
Dude, that was a powerful introduction. Thank you so much. You make me sound a lot better than I really am, but I appreciate that. I'm excited to be here. Ever since you asked me to be on the show, I've been pretty pumped about doing this. So thanks for having me.
Humble and good looking. You cannot get those two things very often. That's amazing.
Do you see the black eye? Do you see the, looks like I'm not wearing mascara despite what it might look like. I got whacked in the face on doing a little Brazilian jiu-jitsu the other day. Damaged the nose, messed the face up, laughed and smiled the whole time. It's great.
I love it. If you guys are listening on a podcast platform and not through YouTube, you have to go just at least check this guy out on social because you're going to go and see and be like, man, that is an amazing beard. And paired up with that black eye, he just looks, he looks like a guy that I just want to give a hug to. So
I kind of got that Viking vibe a little bit. I need like a sword and I don't know. Either that or the homeless guy that lives under the bridge. One of the two, I'm giving off the vibe. So either way.
I love it. So Brandon, can you lean into a little bit about just your story? And I've seen you post, if you guys follow him on social, and I really encourage you guys to do, we'll share it in the show notes after. We'll also have Brandon tell you his handle here in a second. But if you share this on social all the time, how you literally started with nothing and you realized how to all of a sardin create assets out of nothing. And I think we hear all the time from, it's littered on social through Grant Cardone and Chris Crone and you name it, some of these other guys have, hey, it seems so astronomically out of reach for people. And that it's like, oh, I can't just start. I just can't get into it because it's not available for me. But I'd love for you to walk our audience through and tell your story a little bit about how you got into this, how you created your own education, and ultimately how you now make this available for other people.
Yeah, for sure. Man, where do I start? So let me go to the beginning because as Julie Andrews says, it's a very good place to start. All right, we're going to go. I was like 21 years old. I was working at Cold Stone Creamery, scooping ice cream. And from there, I got a job right after that. I was making like $8 an hour. So I wanted to make a little more. So I got a job making $11. No, $9. It was like $9.50, working in an overnight group home. So this is my beginnings, making, whatever, not a lot of money, trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. I thought law school is probably the only thing you can do. I got a history degree in college. I kind of zipped through college as quick as possible, doing like summers and such. So I graduated at 20 from college and was like, I guess I'll go to law school. And meanwhile, I ended up needing a place to live, like to rent a place. So I talked to this lady. I'm like, hey, she was a real estate agent. I said, can you just find me like a rental, like a house to rent? And I'll rent, and she said, well, why don't you just buy a house? I said, well, because I'm 20 and I have no credit and I don't have any money and my parents don't have any money and nobody I know has money. And I live in a cheap, crappy area and I'm very blue collar. And she's like, oh, don't worry about any of that. They give loans to anybody. This is like 2006, 2007, right? So sure enough, I get a loan for a house. And while they approved me for like $1 billion, something like that, because it was crazy, I knew enough to like go for like the cheapest ones. I found I went to like, I don't know what Zillow wasn't even around then, but whatever the MLS site was for property. And I sorted by the cheapest one. And there was one that was $80,000. I was like, that's what I'm going to buy. So I went and bought it and fixed it up. I went to Home Depot, got that book, 1, 2, 3 Home Improvement. It's like an orange book. A lot of the listeners here probably have seen it. It's like the best home improvement book ever sold, I think, because Home Depot owns it. And I spent a whole year fixing that property up, or maybe 9 months. And then I sold it. Now, this didn't require almost any money out of pocket. And this strategy still works today. There's a loan out there. I don't want to get too in the weeds on real estate specific stuff today, but there's a loan out there that if you're willing to live in the property, you can get it for like 3% down or 3.5% down. So we're talking like, $3,000. I had the seller pay the closing costs. And it was in a rough area in a rough town. But I rented all the bedrooms out until I got married. Then I kicked my buddies out and my wife and I lived there. And then we sold the property, made $20,000. This is all like in that first year. I had no idea what I was doing. I just like made $20,000. And that was more money than I had ever even conceived that I would ever have in my life. I mean, again, very blue collar. 20,000 was absurd. So the plan was I'm going to go backpack Europe and go hang out there for the next 5 years. Because when you're 21 at the time, I was 21 when I sold it. I was like, you can backpack Europe at 21 for a long time on $20,000. Ended up paying for a wedding instead. It's probably important. And then we got married. But what it told me was like they're like out of nothing, out of my brain, which didn't even know what I was doing, and just hard work, I was able to like make real money. And that was kind of my introduction into entrepreneurship and kind of the real estate world. So that was kind of the start of what I call as like phase 1 of my career.
It's so interesting to be able to see that mindset shift. And when what happened to you going into that, from the way you thought about money, the way you thought about the way you thought about abundance, the way you thought about
$20,000.
Well, just the way that you thought about like cash flow and the acquisition of it. How did that mindset shift change in that moment, but then also set up your thought process for what is now today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple big things shifted in me in that first deal and then into the second deal. I'll kind of bleed into that one here. The first deal, though, that first house, what I realized, what took place in my head was the addition of the concept that you do not have to trade hours for dollars necessarily. In other words, I had only been raised with one mindset, and that is you work 10 hours, you get paid for 10 hours of work. If you work 9 hours, you get paid less. And if you work 11, you get paid more. It was very linearly correlated to hours and money. I'd never even thought there was anything else out there. Of course, now all the entrepreneurs listening to this are laughing because they're like, that's what business is. Business is leverage where the smarter you are, and sometimes the luckier you are, and sometimes the better business person you are and the harder you work, you can sometimes make more money for less hours. So that first thing it taught me is that there is a ability out there to generate mass amounts of money without having to work massive number of hours. And so that was the first thing that really like shocked me. The second thing in that period is as I was getting ready to sell the property and I knew I was going to make some money, I was like, well, forget law school. This is way better. I'm going to go full-time in real estate. And I remember calling my dad and saying, Dad, I know I was going to go to law school. I know you're excited about that for me, but I got a better idea. I'm going to get into real estate. And I started reading books. I'm like, I'm going to flip houses and buy rental properties. That's what I'm going to do. And my dad said, Brandon, you realize that you don't have a job. You don't have good income and you're making barely any money. You're going to go and buy rentals. What are you going to do if your tenant doesn't pay rent? You're going to lose everything. You're going to go homeless and be broke. And I was like, you're right. What was I thinking? I can't do real estate. And so like that little bit of negativity, and like it was from a good place, right? My dad wants to protect me, wants me doing, be successful. But then I went to Google or whatever the search engine was back in 2007. I think Google was around. And I typed in what to do when tenants
Jeeves
don't pay
knows.
rent.
Wasn't it Jeeves knows?
Yeah,
Ask
there it was.
Jeeves?
Yeah, Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves.
Was it Ask Jeeves? Yeah. Yeah, it probably was. I remember there was Dogpile back in the day. Did you ever use Dogpile? Yeah, it was like a bunch of random terrible search engines combined. Anyway, so I type in what to do when tenants don't pay rent. And all of a sudden I find like page after page of like answers, including this one article. I remember I printed it out. I still have it somewhere. I mean, this is going back 15, 16 years. And the article was on this little tiny blog that was very new, that one guy was running. It was called BiggerPockets. And it was just a quick little post about what to do when your tenant doesn't pay rent. And it was like, step 1, do this, step 2, do this. And the information like was really good. But what that taught me, the shift that made, is that there were answers to the problems that the naysayers will always say, right? And you have to be careful who you take your advice from, right? I mean, think of any entrepreneur who says, I want to start XYZ business. There's always somebody going, here's why that's not a good idea. And the irony is that it's never a person who's done it who's telling you it's a bad idea. It's always some random, Uncle Bob who lost his shirt in gambling tells you that you shouldn't go and buy real estate. Like, it's just like, so that revelation that there were answers to the questions that I had, and I found it on the site BiggerPockets, which again comes into my story later in a very major way. But I discovered there were answers, so I jumped in anyway and figured it out. So that was like probably 2 of the biggest aha moments. And I'll tell a third real quick. I was homeless now at this point because I sold my house, decided not to go to Europe, right? Got married instead. And I went and lived with my in-laws for a little bit, just for a few months while we were trying to figure out what to do. And I remember my agent, the same lady, said, hey, this 2-unit property, this duplex just came up on the market. And it's super cheap. It was like $80,000 again, and it needed a ton of work. And it was in a not great area, pretty close to the other one. And I thought, well, if I lived in one of those units and I rented the other one out, maybe that could help pay my mortgage. So fast forward 3 months, I buy the property. I spend a week fixing the front unit up, making it really nice. And by the way, I bought it with 3.5% down again. So the same loan, it's called the FHA loan. You can buy up to 4 units with it, like in a 4-plex. Anyway, and I remember I rented it out to a tenant, and I remember standing in the driveway as my tenant gave me $650 in cash. Now, don't take cash if you're your landlord. It's a terrible idea, but I didn't know that. But I'm holding the $650, and my mortgage was $620. And I was hit with 2 life-changing revelations. Number 1, I realized I was now living for free. Like, I was not financially free because I still had other bills, but I was living my mortgage, my most expensive bill that most people have is their mortgage. And now that was now off the table, which was awesome. And the second thought that occurred to me at the same time was, well, what if I rented my house out now and I moved to another property? I would actually be making money, like hundreds of dollars a month in profit. And that was like that light bulb moment that was like, oh, if I bought a bunch of these little crappy rental units, at the time, that's all I wanted, then I could eventually quit my job. And so I set myself a goal. I said, I want to get, I didn't even have a date on the goal. I just said, I want to own 30 rental units. If I had 30 tenants paying me rent and I could profit just $100 off each one of them, like I was not thinking big at all. I was like, that's $3,000 a month. That would pay all my living expenses. And so from the time I was 21 to 27, that's all I did. I mean, I just collected rental units while trying to make money however I could. And when I was 27, I had 30 rental units. I quit then I had a job at a bank for a little while, quit that. And that was kind of the end of, I guess, again, like phase 1 of my rental career.
So much great advice you're giving to our entrepreneurs out there who are listening, who are just on the beginning of that road to financial freedom. One of the things that I'm really hearing from you, Brandon, is this idea of time versus financial freedom and how they're almost interrelated. And I would love if you could dive into that idea with our listeners who constantly struggle with that on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, so a few thoughts. First of all, when I decided to pursue real estate as my entrepreneurial journey, it had nothing to do with wealth. I never thought I would be rich. I mean, I remember saying like, I'll probably never be a millionaire. I remember watching people on TV flipping 20 houses a year, or one guy on this one TV show is called Income Property. It's been off the air forever. But this guy, Scott McGilvory, is like, the introduction of the show was like, I've got 100 rental units. And I was always like, 100 rental units? Like, I can't imagine in the next 50 years being able to buy 100 rental units. But so I didn't. Now today I have like 8,000, but like back then I thought 100 was just mind blowing.
And he's not joking. He literally has 8,000.
Yeah, I think it's like 7,500 right now, but we got another 500 under contract. So yeah, we should have hit 8 by the end of the year. Which that's a whole different phase, different story, different thing we can get to. But yeah, that was all I wanted. I did not want to get rich. All I wanted was two things. Number one, I wanted the time to be a good father. Now, it's possible to be a good father working a lot of hours. My dad worked a ton of hours. He was still a good dad, but he worked 50, 60, 70 hours a week to make ends meet. Literally, he's a meat cutter. So to like put food on the table, he works all the time. I would see him for an hour at night, maybe some days. Right. And he works so hard to provide for our family. So I'm not saying you can't be a good dad without time, but I knew that to be the best father, I wouldn't want to be there for every ball game, every dance recital, every field trip. I needed time for that. And that a 9 to 5 with an hour commute, and that, even a 8 to 6 or 7 to 7 if you're a lawyer, like all that stuff would not work. So number one, what drove me was I wanted to be a good father. And number two, I read a quote early on that said, the world is a book and those who don't travel read just a page. And that made such a big impact on me. Like, there's so much out there. The world is a massive thing. And if you don't travel, you don't get to see any of it. It just is there and you don't get to experience it. So I said, I need time for travel. I need time for kids. And so that drove me. I mean, that idea of financial freedom had nothing to do with money, had everything to do with time. And if you really want to, go deep on it, I mean, the idea of like all that matters in terms of wealth is time. I mean, like, cause you could have all the gold coins in the world, and as soon as you're dead, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you can be the richest guy in the graveyard. It doesn't. Yeah, just doesn't matter. You can have a Scrooge McDuck vault and swimming through coins. It just doesn't matter. Yeah, like
I loved that intro, by the way. DuckTales.
Yeah, so good. Woo! Yeah. Oh, it was so good. Now it's going to be in my head all day. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, but if you don't have time, you don't have wealth. Like, it's just period. Like, you can be rich and not have wealth because you have no time. And so, yeah, that drove me. I don't know if that answers that question, but like, that really drove me early on. Was I need to buy my time back, and I'm going to do it through entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it does answer. And I have a part 2 to the question is, if there's a piece of advice you could give to our listeners out there who are just starting this journey, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would say, let's go entrepreneurship as a whole, and then maybe I can zone in on an actual real estate tip. But I'll say entrepreneurship as a whole is almost everything works. First of all, I'll give you a few pieces of advice. Number one, almost everything works if you stick with it long enough. Early on, I wanted to sell kites, like, let's go fly a kite. I had like an online business for like a month where I was going to sell kites online. That would have worked had I stuck with it. I'm sure it would have. Like, people buy kites. I can find a millionaire out there who sold kites. It would take a lot of effort, a lot of pivoting, a lot of, testing and tweaking, and maybe fly to China and get them cheaper. I was not willing to do that stuff. I was going to sell wooden sunglasses once. I thought about doing a mobile oil change thing. Those are all ideas I had over life, and they all would have worked. So the idea matters a lot less, I think, than people think. Now, if you want to be have $1 billion idea, fine. The idea is going to matter a little bit more. But to get financial freedom, like, there's a lot of paths there because there's a lot of humans. Like, you can sell a lot of stuff to a lot of humans, right? So number one is, I just advise people, the consistency and the length of time in which you are consistent matters way more than the idea. So don't get caught up on, I have the wrong idea. And then closely related to that is almost all success in life. And I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on this as well, but almost all the success of everybody I've known who's ever been successful comes down to doing a few fairly boring things consistently over and over and over, right? If you want to get like in shape, you go to the gym every day or every other day, whatever, for like 5 years. And like you eat healthy every day for years. And guess what? It just naturally happens. Like so in entrepreneurship, there's usually a few things you got to do. Like real estate, it's like you got to go out there and get leads. You got to find properties that are for sale. That there's a few simple things you can do for that. You can send out letters. You can have a real estate agent. You can do direct, like a cold calling. There's like 100 different things you can do, but just do a couple of them, but do them consistently. Then you got to make offers and you got to analyze properties. You got to run the numbers. All those things are just boring, repetitive tasks that if you do them over and over and over, you're going to get the results. The results are not magic. Like I always say, success should never be a surprise. No one woke up with a 6-pack and was like, how'd that get there? Like, of course you have a 6-pack. You work at it every day. Of course I have 8,000 rental units. We make 100 offers a quarter on massive properties. I would be shocked if I didn't get the results of what I put in. So anyway, that would be like the advice I have for newer entrepreneurs is stay for the long haul, find the boring, repeatable tasks and just do them consistently but also trying to improve all the time.
It's really, really good because, and I'll kind of add to that is
please
the biggest thing that we talk about when we talk about success, and people are so, or even progress or results, whatever you want to deem that end word. The biggest thing that we see is that people give up when it gets difficult, or people give up when all of a sudden there's a little bit of resistance that the world's now placing on us, or the opportunity that it seemed so shiny at first, which is why that purpose of why we're doing something needs to be so intact and needs to be so tied to that soul part. Because guess what? Exactly what Brandon just spoke about is, if you are consistent and it's tied to a deeper calling as a why as to you're doing it, success is not only possible, it's probable.
Yes. Yes.
And that, quite frankly, for a lot of people makes them almost get a little clammy in the hands and go, oh, that's a little bit scary, actually, that success that I'm looking for and what I'm actually wanting is actually available to me. It's not just possible, it's probable. If I stick with it. And that I think is a big eye opener for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would challenge people to look back at your life. Look back 5 years ago, 10 years ago at something you started. Maybe it was P90X, right? Workout. Maybe it was running like a marathon. Maybe it was some business idea you had. Look back 5 or 10 years and say, did you fail at that thing? Or did you give up at that thing? And I would guess 99.9% of the time in my life anyway, I have failed at almost nothing. I have given up on almost everything that didn't work out. And there's something very telling in that, and kind of sad, but also rewarding to know that the inverse is true. The things that I've stuck with have generally worked out and they've generally succeeded.
Yeah,
100%. And it's literally staying with it. It's literally owning that journey and being willing to say, hey, I'm in this. And it does. And I want to clarify something for you. This doesn't mean that there isn't pivots, turns, twists, and adjustments along the way. It's not saying that what you've started is going to look exactly the same as you finish, but it's the journey and the iterations that are going to happen as that occurs that's going to allow for the success to be probable at the end of the day.
And
there's a school. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, there's a school that one of my buddy's kids goes to, and it's a private school. I don't remember what it's called, but they told me this once that when the kid is in kindergarten, they start a business and they have to continue that business all through their entire school career, all the way to 12th grade. They can pivot whenever they want. They can change, but they're teaching kids that if you just stick with something long enough and always trying to find ways to improve, like I bet you most of those kids just have super successful businesses when they get to 12th grade because they stuck with it for 12 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention, I mean, we're talking about this idea of a journey and the tangible results from it, of sticking with it, but not to mention the intangible, right? Like all the shifts that happen while you're on this journey that you're getting stretched and pulled in all these different ways. I mean, your example of how you used to look at $20,000 and now how you look at $20,000 today is complete 180, right? And so these are the things that oftentimes when we stick with things, we don't even realize are going to create some of those internal mindset shifts as well.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really,
So
really
true.
good. Really, really good.
So Brandon, from somebody who so clearly lives in what we call ownership, and by that we mean somebody who has a clear understanding of who they are, somebody who has a crystal clear understanding of what they want in life. You identified what those two things were pretty early on. You wanted to be able to travel and you wanted to be a father, right?
Yeah.
And somebody who actually shows up and does those things, that is what we call living in ownership. What would you say in a word or a phrase is your definition of ownership?
Yeah, I'm gonna revisit a phrase I said earlier, and I'll say it again because this is probably how I would define ownership, is that understanding that success is not a surprise. Like once you internalize that concept that success is not a surprise, and that like it's an outcome, or it is almost inevitable outcome. When you realize that success is not a surprise, you will that is ownership. You take ownership because you're like, oh, I control this. Like I own this. Like you don't own every single piece along the way. Things happen, right? Like I've gone through a lot of ups and downs in real estate, but I like success in general, or whatever, like you said, the end result comes down to knowing that it is not a surprise. It's usually a series of actions. It's things that I can control. And that's how I would define ownership.
I love it. Control the controllables and leave everything else up to God.
Yeah, there you go. I love it.
I love it. Brandon, you said phase one kind of closed at age 30.
Yeah.
Go through the mindset shift of phase 2 to 3.
Sure. Yeah. So phase one was all about that. Me and Heather doing everything ourselves, building the business by ourselves. I mean, it was me and her, my wife, Heather, like painting units at 2 a.m, screening tenants, doing all the work. And it was hard. And it took until, I was 30 when I finally crossed the $1 million net worth number. But a few years before that is where I kind of got into phase 2. So phase 1 was all about doing the stuff ourselves, a DIY kind of mentality. Phase 2 is when that little site, BiggerPockets, that I'd found years earlier, I became friends with the owner, that single guy working by himself, BiggerPockets, which is very small. We became friends and I ended up starting the podcast with him. So him and I did the BiggerPockets podcast together, which then did far better than we could have ever hoped. We've had over 120 million downloads at this point, 500 plus episodes, I think 600 plus episodes. I did that all the way up until last year. A year ago, I stepped away from that finally because phase 3 took off so well. But before I mention phase 3, let's go phase 2. Was really like if DIY was the first one, it was DIY with real estate. Phase 2 is where I learned like what it means to run a business. What I mean by that is I got to see from a startup mentality, BiggerPockets go from, one person, me, to like 100 people where they have today, from a company making no money to a company making, stupid money. And to see that growth and to be a part of that and to understand how much media plays into that. That was a huge learning thing, and I'll wrap it in this phrase. Josh Dorkin, the guy who founded BiggerPockets, told me this the very first time I ever spoke to him. I got on the phone with him. I was going to help do some writing on his website when I kind of was hit that financial freedom number. And Josh asked me what I was going to do with my now newfound freedom and all that. And I said, well, I'm going to start this blog and I'm going to make a course maybe and, sell a calculator. And he's like, okay, yeah, all that's good. Although, fine, you can do any of that stuff and you'll be very successful, I'm sure, at it. He said, however, if you instead invest the time to make millions of people know, like, and trust you, you can do anything after that. In other words, like focusing on the brand versus focusing on the dollar would pay off 100-fold. And that advice changed my life. And really, like, I did. There's nothing, I like courses today. Like I do a lot of courses, nothing wrong with the course. And I am, going to have my own courses as well. But it was just that concept of focus more on getting people to know, like, and trust me. And then I can write my own checks and make all the courses that I want later on versus like I did put a calculator out for a little while and no one bought it. Why? Because no one knew who I was. There was nobody on my website. So like, it didn't matter. So I built a brand over 9 years. So maybe we call phase 2 like how to build a brand. And that was the biggest lesson I learned there. So then when I launched phase 3, which was an actual real estate company that I own, a commercial real estate company, meaning we buy big stuff. And we bought a $90 million apartment building in Austin. We raised $30 million in 30 hours last week for a bunch of mobile home parks. So now we've got like this big thing. The reason that works is because millions of people know, like, and trust me. So phase 1 was about the knowledge and the DIY and getting the real estate piece nailed. Phase 2 was about how to build a brand and kind of a business around the brand. Phase 3 was really about leadership. Like, I learned how to lead a company. So today we have 97 employees. We have almost $1 billion in real estate and about 8,000 rental units. That came through leadership. And I only work about 5 hours a week at that business, despite it being so big, because I learned a lot of lessons about leadership and bringing other people in that are smarter than me. And I just focus on the brand. And so that's kind of phase 1, 2, and 3.
It's amazing. And guys, if you haven't clued in yet, like, Brandon is somebody to follow. Brandon is somebody to learn from. Brandon is somebody to get into his ecosystem that he has going on, because to his point, it's not just real estate. It's about, how do you build a brand? How do you build leadership? What is good leadership? What is this all about? And then if you're interested, there's some stuff in real estate that you can also lean in on. And so there's so much that he's been able to do and value that he's been able to do and bring to his audience. And the funny thing is, or maybe it's not funny, the crazy thing is, it's available to you too. It's available to anybody. Anybody can do it. I don't care if you are a brand new entrepreneur who's feeling it and has the urge and the inner discontent and the calling inside to go and start a kite company, or if it's somebody who's deep into the entrepreneurship space and you're struggling right now and you need to pivot and not actually give up. And so these are all lessons that I think Brandon can really help with and guide, and you can really get into his ecosystem in a different way. Brandon, how can people find you? How can they get in touch with you? How can they get into and involved in your ecosystem and what you have going on?
Yeah, man. So I'm like a 13-year-old girl. So I'm like on TikTok all the time. No, I do post on TikTok, but TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all that. I'm Beardy Brandon, like beard with a Y. I try not to post only real estate stuff because, if you want to learn how to buy a duplex, there's books written about that. I've written like 6 of them. So like, you can learn the real estate thing. I don't need to teach you that on social media necessarily. What I care more about talking about is, like, when you say you're going to go to the gym and you don't go to the gym, why? When you say you're going to analyze a property and you don't analyze the property, why? Like, I care much more about the mindset behind success and behind failure than I do about the actual metrics. But we'll talk tactics and all that as well. So anyway, Beardy Brandon all over social, and then beardybrandon.com. I have a text message newsletter that goes out every week. So Beard Y Brandon, beard with a Y at the end of it, Brandon.
Now you can never get rid of that beard.
I know, it's for life. Actually, the truth is, it's not even a real beard. It's just a fake one. I shaved my beard 8 years ago. I just glue this on every morning, so I can go out in public and not. Yes.
It's all a part of branding. That was
wouldn't that be
2.
funny? Yeah, actually. 2. So, okay. True story. I got to tell you, this beard, like, this show you how obsessed I am about branding. Like, I'm watching TV like 6 years ago with my dad. I was visiting my parents at their house in Minnesota, and my dad's watching some car show. I don't even know what it was, some reality car show. And the guy on there was like this tall, skinny white dude who had a big, long beard. And the thought I had was, that guy is super interesting because of his beard, but he's super boring. He doesn't have a great personality. He got a TV show because he's got a beard. And that was literally the thought I had. And so from that day, I started growing a beard, because I'm tall, lanky, boring white dude who does real estate. Not very memorable. I grew the beard as something that people could tangibly grab onto. Even the Beardy Brandon, the name, that came as a way of like, okay, the name Brandon Turner, not memorable. How do I make it memorable? And that's where that came from. So yeah, I'm very, very branding focused, because I really believe if you get people to know, like, and trust you, you can do anything.
I love it. And guys, those are words to live by. And I really suggest you go to Brandon's website, get on his newsletter, get on his text chain, so that you can realize the opportunities that exist there and that he's ultimately putting out into the world all the time. And we have to realize that success is not a surprise. Success happens through a series of consistent actions over a long period of time. And that matters most and matters more than the idea in which you're looking to come from. And ultimately, that we have to be aware of who we have in our purview. Who do we have around us? Who do we have in our network? Because oftentimes the answers to the problems that we're ultimately getting are only the ones that are coming from the naysayers. They're not the ones from the people who have done it, the ones who are in the trenches, the ones who are actually in the arena fighting. Just like Theo Roosevelt said, it's the man in the arena that gets the applause that we need to continue to lean from. And being
That's
able
on my
to
wall right there.
I
right
love
there,
it.
that quote. Yeah, it's right there on
love
the wall
it.
behind me.
I love it. I couldn't even see it.
Yeah,
Couldn't even see it.
Meant to
But
be.
ultimately, being willing to stay in it, being willing to lead, being willing to come in, because we know that success is not a surprise and success is different. So own your different, and we'll see you next week.